Welcome to episode 4 of Just About Managing. This week, slightly different agenda. We thought to shake up a little bit. Going to kick off in a minute with just seeing what everyone's been up to. And then we're going to touch a little bit on interviews and what we've learned collectively over our careers in terms of what really works. How do we truly understand who that individual is that sat the other side of the table to us? And then we're just going to wrap up with talking about books that have had the most impact for us in our careers. So hang on with us, and I hope you enjoy this week's podcast. So I'll start off, and then I'll pass to you guys. I've had a different week this week. I actually went to a trade exhibition with one of the companies that I'm acting as a chairman for in the solar industry. So I was at Solar and Storage Live at the Excel Centre. And it was the first time as a business we'd been public with the product. And it just gave me so much energy seeing that genuine interest in what we're producing and the whole concepts and ideas of the product. And as you can see, I'm still quite enthused about it, even though it was Monday I was there. And just that kind of human interaction and being on your feet and talking to different people. And yeah, it was just a great experience, and yeah, came away buzzing. So gives me great hope that we're on the right track. Still loads of work to do, but yeah, invigorated me. So it's kept me going all this week. So yeah, that's me. Chris, go on, what have you been up to?
All right, so I just wanted to share one of the things I've been working on this week, right, which is sharing this. All right, so I'm wearing a t-shirt. You can see this. It's called Mettle. Okay, and Mettle is an app focused on men's mental health, and I just thought I would share part of my journey with that this week. Okay, so there was an advert on Sky Sports in January, amongst many of the games where Man United are getting beat, and I'm kind of like, ugh. So I needed it. Maybe that's why they put that on, because there'd be loads of people being a bit depressed. And I thought, I'm going to give that a go, right? So, being physically fit, great, but you can always get better about being mentally fit. So Mettle has been created by Bear Grylls and another chap called Neil, right? Neil is ex-TV producer. He's produced massive shows like The Apprentice, like The Undateables, okay? And he was very successful in that field. And now what he's looking to do is to bring really compelling content to men and help their mental health, right? And this is a brand new thing. It's like been created at the start of the year. And they've got 3 focus areas. One is breath work and what that can do to your physiology and how that can help you. Meditation, and the last one being self-hypnosis or mind hacks. So they've got these things and you can connect and you can kind of like dial in and dial out of them. So last night was the first ever time that I've attended a men's group, right? Wow. It's the first ever men's group for Mettle. So there was me, Neil, 2 other guys from Mettle, really like awesome facilitator, and 6 other guys dialed in from around the UK, from like Cumbria, London, Birmingham, Yorkshire, and it was really engaging actually, and a real eye-opener. And one of the key things that they talk about at Mettle, one of their values is growth. Okay, so what do they mean by that? It means, growth comes from kind of like taking on new challenges and kind of going through kind of some of that pain of like learning. And their mantra, which is interesting, is to be better like every day, like the value of incremental improvement, 1% improvement, stuff like that. So if you're a better man, you can make better decisions and help make a better world. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So it was really, really interesting. And, when I was like checking out at the end, I felt definitely heard and more connected than before. But the last thing around it, which was really interesting, bearing in mind we were on there for like an hour and a half and there's quite a few of us, right? One of the really interesting things that I took out of that, which I'm trying to think about like today, is like, what are those incremental things that I can build on and like bake into, or like, habit stack. So yeah, I've made a commitment to myself and to that group that I'm going to use the app like every day for the next 2 weeks before the next meeting. And I just wanted to share that I'm going on that growth journey with you guys here and also with the people who listen into the podcast. And that ownership piece is just really, really interesting, because one of the rules of engagement, like in that space, was we would not use the words we and us, but you'd use the words I and me, right? So I can't talk for all of men or things like that, because I don't know other people's perspective, but I can talk honestly and openly from my perspective, and I can take ownership of what I do. And when we talk about books later, that's definitely one of the things that's kind of in my favorite like management book. Okay, so that was me. Other than that, I went to take that this week and danced around, which was great fun. So that was my work.
Brilliant. We put on the podcast the link to Mettle for the listeners so they can look up more themselves. So, but yeah, a week of almost, I want to say extremes, so probably completely the wrong word, but yeah, it sounds, the whole Mettle thing sounds fascinating. Is it a charity, or how does it work?
No, so it's an app, and you subscribe to the app,
Yeah,
and then you basically can put in what you're interested in. So it could be anxiety, it could be sleep, it could be different folks. You can either come with a problem and it's kind of got recommended things that you listen to, or you can explore different areas that you want to be better at, and then it's that way. And then you basically crank up like levels, a bit like Tetris, right, for how many minutes and different stuff. But it's like really fascinating. I mean, I'm on day 22 of like doing meditation, and I'd never done that before. And it's just been really interesting, and just the whole dynamics around breath work, what that can do to your physiology, like why that makes sense. Yeah, I'm like day 6 on that. So yeah, but I'd recommend it. It is good. It's definitely helping, because there's lots going on, particularly like with starting a new business. So yeah, being able to calm down, focus, and kind of recharge, really important, right? Aside from like dancing around to relight my fire.
Oh dear, right, Lee Smith, beat that.
I can't. It's taken a step down again now. I think it's been, for me, it's been a good week, a positive week. I've actually had less coaching this week than previous weeks. So I've had a few coaching sessions, but that's then given me time to catch up with 2 people that we were on our coach training with, John. So it was great to catch up with them and hear how they're doing. And also caught with 3 of our ex-colleagues this week as well.
Wow.
So it's been a nice week just to reset almost, and just check in with a few people. I've really enjoyed it. And also an afternoon delivering a management training program yesterday to people across the west coast of the US and the UK. So it's been a nice mixture.
Very good. And the chickens all still safe?
Touch wood, they're still safe. Mink is nicely out of the way, and chickens safely in the new houses, John. All
good. Yeah. Okay, right. It's probably time to segue into the proper business of today. So we want to talk about. I find this whole subject around interviewing fascinating, and as I feel as my career's evolved, and even through to this day, how I think about it as a subject, and it's and the evolution of interviewing someone for a job to interviewing someone to actually understand who they are. I find that whole, I could talk for hours on it and bore people stupid, but yeah, so I thought this is quite a rich discussion. I thought we could kind of peel the cover off today and get some of your perspectives and wisdom, and and we may even get into the whole concept of, do you have a killer question you love answering? But yeah, I'm going to go to Lee just to for you to kind of launch into it for us.
Thanks, John. Do you know what, when you pinged the question over, because we obviously thought about this from last night when you pinged the question over, the first thing that came to mind for me was I have definitely never perfected the art of interviewing at all. And I think it's one of the areas that it's a strange one to talk about when I don't think I was very good at interviewing other people. And I don't know whether that's my perception of it or reality in there. And part of that is when I was interviewing, and this may come into what you mentioned there, John, actually, in a way. When I was interviewing, I would very much focus on the person and not the skill set required for the job, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With that view of, is this person going to be a good fit for the team? And that wouldn't necessarily be a fit, say they're the same as everybody else at all, but a fit that meant that they either made the team better or they brought a dynamic in there that would work well from that perspective. And it links a little bit to a book reference I was going to make later. There's a really good book, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's called Legacy, and it's the history of the All Blacks, the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. And they have a policy as part of the All Blacks. There's a lot in there. There's some really great points, one of which is being their main aim of being an All Black is you leave the jersey in a better position than when you picked it up. And that's their core policy. And I think that's a great philosophy for business as well in there, in any role you're doing. But one of their other policies in there, and excuse the language in there, is they have a no dickheads policy. And it is basically, you can be the best player in New Zealand's history, but if you're a dickhead, you're not part of the All Blacks, because they don't want that dynamic in there. And I think it was, I'm not saying that was the policy at all that I played to, but it was very much, it was interviewing the person, say, is this person going to fit in? Are they going to bring something different? Are they going to bring something that challenges but makes us better, but not disrupt that to that side of things, that they have a detrimental impact on the team that we've got.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, you're right. And that's, I know you draw a lot on those parallels from sport into the workplace, but you're right. I think that cohesive nature of, okay, how does the team perform at the highest level against each other? With each other, and then actually the role that person plays is of such importance, because if you don't get, in my mind, if you don't get those foundations right, actually, whether they are in terms of technically strong, the whole thing can collapse down like a house of cards. So, yeah, and I think it's often, though, I think the trained assumption of what where we start out in the working life is actually not on those elements. It's on the, have they got what it takes to do the job? And yeah,
definitely.
So, where's your thinking, Chris?
Well, I'd just like to add to what Lee was saying first, right? So within that space, like, no one's success is, no one's self-made, right? They are supported. No one's an island. Whatever they are successful in, it's a combination of being part of a bigger team, right? So that is like hugely important. I mean, I've listening to High Performance podcast this week with Jake Humphreys, and it had Schwarzenegger on there, and he was talking about, one of the things that really gets his goat is when people say you're a self-made person, and actually even he, he's kind of like, you think he's kind of like made it in like 3 different industries. He doesn't see himself as self-made. It's all about the camaraderie, the teamwork with other people, the people that have supported him and helped and supported him, that have helped him to be successful. So we come back to the question, which is, interviewing. I think when I've looking back now, and I think you clearly get better at this as you go, but really what you're trying to do is to find the right person for the role, but as part of that process, set them up for success. You want them to be successful in that role, to bring the best skills of themselves, right? And therefore, as you go through the interview process, and not just the interview questions, because it's how people interact all the way from like, even when they're not in the room, how do they engage with people, like on email, on chat, what do they say, what's their reputation, how are they, speaking to anybody, right? But really it's about the fit. Yeah. Is the fit right? And will it set them up for success? So I think about this in three ways when I was interviewing. First thing is there a good fit with their skill set, and are they able to perform in that role? That is clearly important, because they could be the best person ever, but if you put me in the All Blacks, I'd get flattened, right? So they need to be able to perform well. So bring the skills, be genuinely interested in it. So you ask competency-based questions and ask for examples. First one, performance. Second one is definitely around the fit to the culture and the team and the organization. That's hugely important. So broad questions about that space, hugely important. And that's about asking questions about when you were successful as part of a team. What role did you play in that team? How did that make you feel? Talk to me about how you build and nurture relationships, that kind of stuff, right? And then the third bit is really around, jobs can be hard and difficult. So actually, it's important to understand that it's great if someone's low maintenance, right? High performance, low maintenance, that sounds really ideal. However, if that low maintenance is built on hiding things and stuff like that, that would be a disaster. So actually what you're really looking for is someone who's resilient, but will also reach out and ask for assistance. So they need to be a real rounded, like empathetic, mature person in terms of emotionally mature to be able to reach out. So that kind of like emotional maturity and resilience, and that's important. So what I would be doing through the interview process, guys, right, I think, is to try and cover those bases. And if they're right, found someone who can work well in a team, who can perform in that role, but is also very self-aware of where they're strong, but where they need assistance and aren't scared to ask, then there could be a good fit. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's what I tried to do. And that definitely changed, because certainly on day one, when I had hair and was interviewing, it was more like performance. But actually, yeah, nobody really wants like Ronaldo coming in and kind of just flexing their muscles and being a bit of a tool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting. Yeah, thank you for the masterclass. Everyone can pause and play it back when they're going through the next phases in their interview process. My evolution of my interviewing process has very much mirrored that, and I think where I've kind of leaned further and further onto is really understanding about how they communicate. And so to me, there's two tracks I seem to lean upon a lot now in interviewing. One is how they communicate and taking them out of their comfort zone in terms of communication. And then the other element, kind of path they go down is actually that is self-awareness and actually being able to describe themselves. And yeah, so my two killer questions, which I love asking. So one is I get people to teach me something that I don't know, and it can be anything from, doesn't have to be work related, and I can pretty much remember everybody who I've hired, what they taught me. And the subject's absolutely irrelevant. It's all about the delivery. And, you actually ask them to teach me something in the simplest manner, so I'll remember it. And there's a bit of other preamble around it. But it's amazing with some people, they just completely freeze. But it's, and to me, that's, if I'm working directly with that person, actually understanding, can I get on that same wavelength? Can I consume what they're talking about, irrespective of what the subject is? And and do I remember it? And to my simple mind, that makes such a difference in terms of being able to think about that kind of fit communication, not only if they're communicating with me, but with the sort of wider population.
What
And
have
the
you
other
been
one,
taught, John? I was going to say quickly, what have you been taught in there?
how to make butter chicken, some surfing, how to strengthen, why you should strengthen your glute muscles as you get older if you're a long distance runner. It's been some
Excellent.
complete random things that you wouldn't believe, but
You can still remember that one, John.
which
You
one?
teach us that after, all right? Teach
The
us the glute
glutes.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out to Rajesh Atal for that one, because it's an over 50s problem. But then my other kind of angle, which is the do they really understand themselves? And I'm not a psychologist, so I don't understand why this works, but I would say 90% of the time this works, and is actually, I always ask this: if I was to ask your partner / best friend, whatever, you have to work out what you're going to who you're going to ask it about, to describe your personality, what would they say? And 90% of the time, they don't have enough time to bullshit the answer, and actually they're naturally talking about themselves. And it's fascinating how that prompts and what comes out of that. And that is it really starts to get into the depth of, are they really self-aware, or are they completely in denial in terms of their personality? But they've stood me well, those two. But I think it's, in some ways, I find it's a fascinating experiment on humans as well. When you start getting into questions like that, particularly when you consistently ask to say that question all the time, in terms of understanding people. But
Definitely. I think the theme through that, when you think of all of them, is there's all of those pieces we've talked about that are really about, again, interviewing the person and getting to know the person. And like you said, that adaptation from just interviewing for skill set initially to how we've evolved.
Yeah.
I think the other piece for me, as you were talking there, that came to mind, is getting other people's perspectives. To try and take any personal bias out of that as well. So
Yes.
I think, we talk about ourselves interviewing, but I think we've all got other people to interview as well for those roles.
Yeah,
to get that external perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I like to almost break out. So you got to Chris's steps that he was talking about. Actually, you get someone separate that does the competency to someone is really digging into the person. Because if we're honest with ourselves, most interviews are somewhere between half an hour long, and actually you should do it justice over the different core elements. It's so hard. And I think that if you're going to be spending more of your life with that person than your own family, you deserve to actually give it the right amount of time, in my mind. But,
completely.
Yeah.
I think the other piece.
It's also quite interesting if you can, as part of that process, meet that person and it's nothing to do with the office building, or you meet them for a coffee, or you go for food, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It's all about that intelligence of that, being able to read that messaging that's coming across, because it's not just the verbal answer and even the tone. It's the body language and the whole interaction with other people. Just fascinating, particularly because it's relatively easy to like bluff some of that stuff for in a room for like 50 minutes, but if you hire the wrong person, you got them for like 52 weeks a year, and vice versa. So it is really tricky. And I think, but what's also interesting is that, I mean, personally, John, I've never believed in like a killer question for me, if I'm honest, right? Because when I did try that as a technique a few times and it was useful, but then weighted my feedback, I became a bit more biased towards the
Yeah.
answer to that question. And there are certain people who can react better to things they don't know. And then other people are more reflective, and actually a truly diverse team has got that blend of, action, answer, now orientation, actually more reflective people. And some people are more around people and kind of get it, and then other people. So I hear you, and it's like part of it. And I do think there's like bits, but I mean, we could kind of agree to disagree on here. I think that's okay, right? And I think, yeah. So it's like that's all right, but yeah, I don't know. I can remember some of the killer questions, and the more, because I'm in that, in the disc model, that model, I'm in the visionary space.
Yeah.
For me to be able to answer something, I could then go on as I am now forever, which actually isn't the answer you're looking for. So it's just interesting. So I think in the whole process, it's more to do with the process and the people, right? I think, I don't know.
I think
Yeah.
Interesting.
the other couple of pieces from the other side of it, the other side of the coin on it, and one that I'd heard recently actually from another ex-colleague, was again creating an environment for those interviewees to be at their best in the interview as well.
Yeah.
And therefore, someone I spoke to who went for, I can't remember where they were interviewing actually, went for an interview, and they asked that interviewer or that company to say, actually, the way I operate, I like the space to think. So can I have the interview questions up front, please? And one organisation said no, completely not. And the other organisation said yes and gave them to them. And again, for them, that put them in the position where they could be at their best in that interview. And I thought that was a great way of looking at it again, in saying that, again, people operate in very different ways. And understanding what's going to make them be at their best in an interview situation can also be a really good way of looking at it, actually, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one firm who I've forgotten, and I wouldn't want to quote the wrong one, whose policy is now to share the interview questions in advance across the board, which is completely different, right? It's like thinking about that partnership and how you onboard people and transparency. I mean, things have changed a lot.
Yeah.
In this space, it'd be really interesting to see if that becomes more common.
Definitely.
I don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing I was just going to touch on, Johnny, because I
Yeah,
remember
go on.
on
You
the,
can
on
be
the
our
other,
last word of wisdom.
I know it was thinking about again, it's probably another topic altogether in some respects. The other side of the coin of when you're interviewing, and I remember listening to back in our days of sort of in HSBC, listening to a lady called Nora Darmy there talk about resilience, and one of the great pieces she touched on in there was about interviewing when you're going for a role. And the importance of saying, actually, we often think of it as individuals. We go into an interview almost with a mindset of we're not begging, but we're like, we need this job, and therefore it's sell yourself, sell yourself, sell yourself. And she spun it on its head a little bit and going, actually, that's our one opportunity as being interviewed, for us to interview the hiring manager, and say, do I want to work with this person that is hiring me in? Because back to your point, you're going to spend a lot of time with that individual and that manager and that leader. And that can have a huge influence on your career, your life, your personal life. And, as we all know, you can work for some great people and some poor people. But going into that interview with that mindset of saying, actually, yes, I want this job.
Yeah.
I only want this job if it's right for me. And I want to make sure the person I'm going to be working for is going to put me in the best possible position as well. And I thought it was a great piece of advice in there that I'd never really considered in that way before, to be honest.
And I think that's something that, as you go further through your career, you become more sensitized to the environment that you succeed in.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is about the management style of who you work for and the type of care and support they give you, allowing you to prosper in that role. So I think Nor's is a very smart lady, and she's absolutely right in terms of that. So yeah, good. Right, we're going to wrap up the first part of the podcast, but please stick around for part two. We're going to talk about books and ones that have really had an impact on us in our work lives. So we'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk about books and how they've had the impact on you and your career. And I think this goes across. There's a whole gamut here in terms of those types of influences, from everything from. I was thinking about preparing for this. So there's elements of there's certain autobiographies that I've read, actually quite a few of them kind of sporting in nature, that have made me reflect through my career, but right through to some heavier pieces of fiction. I still don't have the bookcase for it. We have got one example book here that we could put on the case there like that, couldn't we? But I think there's a whole gamut, and I think this is the beauty of reading, is actually finding out what really adds value to you, and importantly, what can you consume and translate that into you and your career. So, Chris, come on, kick us off. What floats your boat? What's really made that impact for you? And it can only be one book.
This sounds really. It can only be one. Pick one and only one. Well, I was going to pick the one that you just put on the shelf. Okay, believe it or not.
I'm not going to talk about this one, so you're more than welcome to. I stand here and hold it.
I want to talk. All right, I want to talk about that one. Look at this version of this. Where is it?
Please pause, readers. Here we go. Yours a little bit more dog-eared than mine.
Yeah, this is my most beaten up book. All right, so 7 Habits, Stephen Covey, 1989. To me, this is like just such a pivotal book for me. It really helped me. Okay. The reason why I like this book so much is because the structure just makes total sense. And being someone who likes pictures, there are pictures in it, so I can remember what the key messages are. But yeah, the 7 habits, first 3 habits are about you, right? And really gaining your independence. Then the habits 4, 5, and 6 about your interaction with everybody else, interdependence. And then habit 7 is about keeping yourself like refreshed, sharpening the saw. And whenever I've got like difficult times or things have been really, noisy, or you kind of get dragged into distractions of the world. In habit number 1, there's the circle of concern and the circle of influence, and history, mistakes, horrible people who talk about you, other stuff. That's just like such a waste of time, space, energy, really drives you into a negative space and stops you growing. In fact, it makes you shrink. And that ability to be proactive and to focus on what you can do is really important. And I do think about that a lot. And it kind of starts with that. It's kind of like the basis of a lot of what I've learned since then. And then there are other things around win-win and other stuff later in the book, and they're all really good. But, people can only remember this quote. Like, they don't even have to look at it. People can only hurt you if you let them. Don't let it touch you. It's just like fantastic. I just think it's a really brilliant book. I know probably loads of people have read this or whatever, but it's an oldie and it's a goodie.
Wow.
Excellent.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lee, come on then.
Funny enough, I've actually got a copy of that book down there, but I've never read it. So I'm going to read it now, Chris, actually, as well. I think for me, I'm a terrible reader. So I've never read. And before if I think back to before this time last year, I'd maybe only read 2 books in my life, other than Jennifer Yellow Hat and Billy Blue Hat in school. Um, they were quite deep for me. And then what I found was when I left and moved into this new sort of career direction, I got a bit more of a passion, if you like, in that following that passion, and therefore wanted to read. Now I'm still an awful reader, so what I've done is sign up to Audible and download the audio books and listen. And I think you said only 1 book. I mean, I'm going to shout out a couple of others very, very quickly. One was Legacy.
We'll let you. Go on.
One was Legacy that I mentioned earlier.
Different rules. Like the klaxon buzzer. Like what? What?
Yeah. But
Sorry, carry on, Lee. But note that, listeners. Note that.
He'll be done.
Carry on, Lee.
He'll be done in half the amount of time as you with 1 book, Chris.
Yeah, but that wasn't the rules or the guardrails, John. 1 for Chris, 10 for... Right, go on, Lee.
So Legacy, I'll shout out very quickly because that's the All Blacks one that I mentioned earlier. Brilliant book, talks about sort of leadership and that culture piece. One that was put onto by someone who worked for me as part of my team in India called Sumit Mittal. I'll shout out to one called Psychology of Money. Really good read again in there. But the one that I mentioned that really had the biggest impact on me for a completely different reason, if you like, was actually Jimmy Carr's book, his latest book, which is, I'm just going up here, Before and Laughter. And it's sort of a semi-autobiographical about himself, but semi-self-help and everything. And it was just a really interesting book on thinking about life and career and things like that, with loads of little great snippets in there that talk about things where his career pivoted, what he focused on. But one of the things that's always stuck with me, and it wasn't a reason for that change in direction, but it almost affirmed it with me, was he talks about a story in there with the guy who wrote Catch-22, and I can never remember the guy's name, Heller, I think it was. And he talks about a story where he went to a big lavish party I think it was in Beverly Hills or something, with another author. And as they walked into this party, he looked around at everything, and this guy was pointing out chandeliers and these champagne fountains, just celebrities everywhere. And this guy turned to Heller and said, this guy earns more in a day than you've ever earned in your whole lifetime with Catch-22 as a book. And Heller turned around to him and said, he said, but I've got one thing this guy will never have. And he said, what's that? And he went, enough. And I thought that was a really profound, quite simple, but quite profound piece of going, actually, when we think about our careers and things and our aspirations and where we're trying to aim for, what we're hitting, it's sort of quite a grounding, for me, it was quite a grounding little statement of going, well, what do I actually need? What am I going for in a way? And there's loads of little snippets in this Jimmy Carr book that I think are absolutely brilliant. I got onto it through listening to the Diary of CEO discussion with him, the first one he did on the Diary of CEO, and I thought it was a fantastic listen. So certainly recommend that one.
Wow. Thank you. 3 books there, not even 2. Sorry. We'll forgive you.
I'll fall back into line next time, definitely.
So my 1 book is a book called Black Box Thinking by an author called Matthew Syed, and that was his first book I read. But a little backstory: so Matthew Syed, he's an Olympic table tennis champion. He then became a writer for the Times newspaper, mostly sports, but then has got into investigative journalism and he's on the fringes. Some of his books actually get more into business writing beyond Black Box Thinking, but Black Box Thinking is more about challenging how we think about a subject or what has happened. How can we make it better? How can we change? And for me, when I first read it, and I've read it several times, the way he writes is so beautiful because it's very relatable. It's not complex, but it really makes you think about and relate the subject to your everyday life or your work life. And for me, at the time when I first read Black Box Thinking, I was running a risk management team. And for me, it was a real moment of clarity in terms of thinking about how I encouraged the team to consider what their role was in terms of their interaction with the business and supporting the business and investigating incidents and things like that. And it's just been a mantra since that point in my career, since reading that book was probably a decade ago now. I find him as an author fascinating. He's also got a podcast on BBC Sounds called Sideways, which is more the investigative journalism. But yeah, I would if I was to, there's not many books I reread, but that's one of them that I will go back and I will read it cover to cover. So and it's I only have it on my Kindle, but I should really actually have a hard copy, because I think the books I love, I think should be up here. So I will get a hard copy to put up here when the bookcase is done. So yes, if you've got time, pick it up. The other thing I would say, which is, as you can see, Chris, it's partly read. It's the 7 Habits on here aren't fully read, but I'm a cheater when it comes to reading as well. So I subscribe to Blinkist. Which, for those of you who, it's actually a really cheap subscription, but so the Blinkist version, which is Audible, you can read the text as well, of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is 20 minutes long. And so you get the core parts. Now, I really like Blinkist for a reason, which is if someone says, you hear a review on a book or someone talks about it, I go and listen to it on there or read the summary, and then that actually helps me think about, okay, yes, I'd really like to read that whole book. But it's also a cheat. And if someone asks you, have you read such and such a book, you can run off and go and listen to it for 20 minutes, and then actually you've got the Blagger's Guide to the basic elements of it. So
that sounds really smart. Need to look at that.
So I'm not the only one that's bent the rules, Chris. John's now covered 1 book, 1 podcast, 1 app. There's a few of us bending the rules here. Don't just pin me down on that one.
Oh, I'll need to set off the Chris Claxon then. John. Calling John.
Oh dear. Yeah. Well, on that basis, I think we owe it to Chris to to wrap up our book section, and with any other final words you'd like to share with us on it.
Me?
Yes.
No, I'm good. Yeah. Answer the question. Move on. Done. It's nearly time for my tea.
Good. Right. Well, on that basis, we really hope you've enjoyed this episode of Just About Managing. And remember to follow the podcast from wherever you listen to us. He's been Lee Smith. He's been Chris Dingle. And I'm John Lloyd. And you've been listening to Just About Managing. Goodbye.